Hello, my dears. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Now, please let me know if there are any issues that you come across in regarding the audio levels. But beyond that, I hope that we all have a nice and calming session today. So, in regards to last time, we finished up the section over Tir na Nog, and now we shall continue on with a new section called Priests and Saints. Everywhere in Ireland are the holy wells. People, as they pray by them, make little piles of stones that will be counted at the last day and the prayers reckoned up. Sometimes they tell stories. Those following are their stories. They deal with the old times, whereof King Alfred of Northumberland wrote, I found in Innisfail the fair, in Ireland while in exile there, women of worth, both grave and gay men, many clerics and many laymen. Gold and silver I found, and money, plenty of wheat and plenty of honey. I found God's peoples rich in pity, found many a feast and many a city. There are no martyrs in the stories. The ancient chronicler Giraldus taunted the Archbishop of Cashel because no one in Ireland had received the crown of martyrdom. Our people may be barbarous, the prelate answered, but they have never lifted their hands against God's saints. But now that a people have come amongst us who know how to make them, it was just after the English invasion, we shall have martyrs plentifully. The bodies of saints are fastidious things. At a place called 4 Mile Water in Wexford, there is an old graveyard full of saints. Once it was on the other side of the river, but they buried a rogue there, and the whole graveyard was moved across in the night, leaving the rogue corpse in shadow. It would have been easier to merely move the rogue corpse, but they were saints, and they had to do things in style. Our first story for today is called The Priest's Soul, and it is attributed to Lady Wilde. In former days there were great schools in Ireland, where every sort of learning was taught to the people, and even the poorest had more knowledge at that time than many a gentleman do now. But as to the priests, their learning was above all, so that the fame of Ireland went over the whole world, and many kings from foreign lands used to send their sons all the way to Ireland to be brought up in Irish schools. Now at this time there was a little boy learning at one of them, who was a wonder to everyone for his cleverness. His parents were only laboring people, and of course poor. But young as he was, and poor as he was, no king's nor lord's son could come up to him in learning. Even the masters were put to shame, for when they were trying to teach him, he would tell them something they had never heard before, and show them their ignorance. One of his great triumphs was in an argument, and he would go on till he proved to you that black was white, and then when you gave in, for no one could beat him in a talk, he would turn round and show you that white was black, or maybe that there was no color at all in the world. When he grew up, his poor father and mother were so proud of him that they resolved to make him a priest, which they did at last, though they nearly starved themselves to get the money. Well, such another learned man was not in Ireland, and he was as great in argument as ever, so that no one could stand before him. Even the bishops tried to talk to him, but he showed them at once they knew nothing at all. Now, there were no schoolmasters in those times, but it was the priests that taught the people. And this man was the cleverest of Ireland. All the 14 kings, all the foreign kings, sent their sons to him, as long as he had house room to give them. So he grew very proud, and began to forget how low he had been, and worst of all, even to forget God, who had made him what he was. And the pride of arguing got hold of him, so that from one thing to another he went on to prove that there was no purgatory, then no hell, and then no heaven, and then no God, and at last that men had no souls, but were no more than a dog or a cow, and when they died there was an end of them. Whoever saw a soul, he would say, if you can show me one, I will believe. No one could make any answer to this, and at last they all came to believe that there was no other world. Everyone might do what they liked in this, the priest setting example, for he took a beautiful young girl to wife. But as no priest or bishop in the whole land could be got to marry them, he was obliged to read the service over for himself. It was a great scandal, yet no one dared to say a word, for all the king's sons were on his side, and would have slaughtered anyone who tried to prevent his wicked going-ons. Poor boys, they all believed in him, and thought every word he said was truth. In this way his notions began to spread about, and the whole world was going to be the bad. When one night an angel came down from heaven and told the priest he had but 24 hours to live, he began to tremble and asked for a little more time. But the angel was stiff and told him that he could not be. "What do you want time for, you sinner?" he asked. "Oh, sir, have pity on my poor soul," urged the priest. "Oh, no. You have a soul, then," said the angel. "Pray, how did you find that out?" "It was fluttering in me ever since you appeared," answered the priest. "What a fool I was to not think of it before." "A fool indeed," said the angel. "What good was all your learning when it could not tell you that you had a soul?" "Ah, my lord," said the priest, "if I am to die, tell me how soon I may be in heaven." "Never," replied the angel. "You denied there was a heaven." "Then, my lord, may I go to purgatory?" "You denied purgatory also. You must go straight to hell," said the angel. "But, my lord, I denied hell also," answered the priest. "So you can't send me there either." The angel was a little puzzled. "Well," said he, "I'll tell you what I can do for you. You may either live now on earth for 100 years, enjoying every pleasure, and then be cast into hell forever, or you may die in 24 hours in the most horrible torments, and pass through purgatory, there to remain till the day of judgment, if only you can find some one person that believes, and through his belief mercy will be vouchsafed to you, and your soul will be saved." The priest did not take 5 minutes to make up his mind. "I will have death in 24 hours," he said, "so that my soul may be saved at last." On this, the angel gave him directions as to what he should do, and left him. Then immediately the priest entered the large room where all the scholars and the king's sons were seated, and called out to them, "Now tell me the truth, and let none fear to contradict me. Tell me, what is your belief? Have men souls?" "Master," they answered, "once we believed that men had souls, but thanks to your teachings we believe so no longer. There is no hell and no heaven and no God. This is our belief, for it is thus you taught us." The priest grew pale with fear and cried out, "Listen, I taught you a lie. There is a God, and man has an immortal soul. I believe now all that I denied before." But the shouts of laughter that rose up drowned the priest's voice, for they thought he was only trying them for an argument. "Prove it, master," they cried. "Prove it. Who has ever seen God? Who has ever seen the soul?" The room was stirred with their laughter. The priest stood up to answer them, but no word he could utter. All his eloquence, all his powers of argument have gone from him, and he could do nothing but wring his hands and cry out, "There is a God! There is a God! Lord, have mercy on my soul!" And they all began to mock him and repeat his own words that he had taught them. Show him to us. Show us your God. And he fled from them, groaning with agony, for he saw that none believed. And how, then, could his soul be saved? But he thought next of his wife. She will believe, he said to himself. Women never give up God. And he went to her. But she told him that she believed only what he taught her, and that a good wife should believe in her husband first, and before and above all things in heaven or earth. Then despair came on him, and he rushed from the house, and began to ask everyone he met if they believed. But the same answer came from one and all. We believe only what you have taught us, for his doctrine had spread far and wide through the country. Then he grew half mad with fear, for the hours were passing, and he flung himself down on the ground in a lonesome spot, and wept and groaned in terror, for the time was coming fast when he must die. Just then a little child came by. "God save you kindly," said the child to him. The priest started up. "Do you believe in God?" he asked. "I have come from a far country to learn about him," said the child. "Will you honor me and direct me to the best school they have in these parts?" "The best school and the best teacher is close by," said the priest, and he named himself. "Oh, no, not that man," answered the child, "for I am told he denies God and heaven and hell, and even that a man has a soul, because he cannot see it. I would soon put him down." The priest looked at him earnestly. "How?" he inquired. "Why," said the child, "I would ask him if he believed he had life to show me his life." "But he could not do that, my child," said the priest. "Life cannot be seen. We have it, but it is invisible," answered the child. "Then if we have life, though we cannot see it, we may also have a soul, though it is invisible." When the priest heard him speak these words, he fell down on his knees before him, weeping for joy, for now he knew that his soul was safe. He had met one at last that believed. And he told the child his whole story, all of his wickedness and pride and blasphemy against the great God, and how the angel had come to him and told him of the only way in which he could be saved, through the faith and prayers of someone that believed. "Now then," he said to the child, "take this penknife and strike it into my breast, and go on stabbing the flesh until you see the paleness of death on my face. Then watch, for a living thing will soar up from my body as I die, and you will then know that my soul has ascended to the presence of God. And when you see this thing, make haste and run to my school, and call on all my scholars to come and see that the soul of their master had left the body, and that all he taught them was a lie, for that there is a God who punishes sin, and a heaven and a hell, and that man has an immortal soul destined for eternal happiness or misery. I will pray, said the child, to have courage to do this work. And he kneeled down in prayer. Then when he rose up, he took the penknife and struck it into the priest's heart, and struck again and again till all the flesh was lacerated. But the priest still lived, though in the agony was horrible, for he could not die until the 24 hours had expired. At last the agony seemed to cease, and the stillness of death settled on his face. And the child who was watching saw a beautiful living creature with 4 snow-white wings mount from the dead man's body into the air and go fluttering round his head. So he ran to bring the scholars, and when they saw it, they all knew it was the soul of their master. And they watched with wonder and awe until it passed from sight into the clouds. And this was the first butterfly that was ever seen in Ireland. And now all men know that the butterflies are the souls of the dead, waiting for the moment when they may enter purgatory, and so pass through torture to purification and peace. But the schools of Ireland were quite deserted after a time, for people said, "What is the use of going so far to learn, when the wisest man in all Ireland did not know if he had a soul till he was near losing it, and was only saved at last through the simple belief of a little child." Quite an intense thing to ask of a child. One would almost argue if that would have been murder. But since it was an ordained killing, he was exempt, so it would seem. Our next story for today is actually a little poem called The Priest of Colony, attributed to W.B. Yeats. Good Father John of Heart in penal days rode out to up Shawneen in his freelands, with his snipe marsh and his trout. In trust he took John's lands, Sliveens were all his race, and he gave them as dowers to his daughters, and they married beyond their place. But Father John went up, and Father John went down, and he wore small holes in his shoes, and he wore large holes in his gown. They all loved him, only the Shawneen, whom the devils have by the hair, for their wives and their cats and their children, to the birds in the white of the air. The birds, for he opened their cages as he went up and down, and he said with a smile, "Have peace now," and went his way with a frown. But if anyone died, came keeners hoarser than rooks. He bade them give over their keening, for he was a man of books. And these were the works of John, when weeping score by score, people came into Collooney, for he died at 94. There was no human keening. The birds from Knocknera and the world round Knockshanashe came keening in that day, keening from Insamurri, nor stayed for bit of sup. This way were all reproved who dig old customs up. Collooney is a few miles south of the town of Sligo. Father O'Hairt lived there in the last century and was greatly beloved. These lines accurately record the tradition. No one who has held the stolen lands have prospered. It has changed owners many times. Our next story for today is called The Holy Well and the Murderer, attributed to Lady Wilde. The well of St. Brendan in High Island has great virtue, but the miraculous power of the water is lost should a thief or a murderer drink from it. Now a cruel murder had been committed on the mainland, and the priest noticed that the people that if the murderer tried to conceal himself in the island, no one should harbor him or give him food or drink. It happens at this time that there was a woman of the island afflicted with the pains in her limbs, and she went to the holy well to make the stations and say the prayers, and so get cured. But many days passed, and still she got no better, though she went round and round the well on her knees, and recited the paters and a's as she was told. Then she went to the priest and told him the story, and he perceived at once that the well had been polluted by the touch of someone who had committed a crime. So he bade the woman to bring him a bottle of the water, and she did as he desired. Then, having received the water, he poured it out, and breathed on it 3 times in the name of the Trinity, when lo, the water turned into blood. "Here is the evil," cried the priest. "A murderer has washed his hands in the well." He then ordered her to make a fire in the circle, which she did, and he pronounced some words over it, and a mist rose up in the form of a spirit in the midst, holding a man by the arm. "Behold the murderer," said the spirit, and when the woman looked on him, she shrieked, "It is my son, my son," and she fainted. For the year before, her son had gone to live on the mainland, and there, unknown to his mother, he had committed a dreadful murder, for which the vengeance of God lay on him. And when she came to herself, the spirit of the murderer was still there. "Oh, my lord, let him go," she cried. "You wretched woman," answered the priest, "how dare you interpose between God and vengeance? This is but the shadowy form of your son, but before night he shall be in the hands of the law, and justice shall be done." Then the forms and the mist melted away, and the woman departed in tears, and not long after she died of a broken heart. But the well from that time regained all its miraculous powers, and the fame of its cures spread far and wide throughout the islands. You would think a native to that island would know, and thus know better, in regards to the murderous son. But alas, our next story for today is called Legend of Neil Moore, attributed to Lady Wilde. There is a great hole or well near the river Sear, always filled with water, whose depth no man had yet fathomed. Near it is a castle, which in old times belonged to a powerful chief called Neil Moore. One day, while his servants were saving the hay, a violent tempest of wind and rain came on, which destroyed the crop. Then Neil Moore was filled with rage, and he mounted his horse and drew his sword, and rode forth to the field, and there he challenged the Lord God himself into battle. And he swung his sword round his head and struck at the air, as if he would kill and slay the great invisible spirit. On which suddenly a strange thing happened, for a great whirlwind rose, and the earth opened, and Neil Moore, still astride on his horse, and with his sword in his hand, was lifted high up into the air, and then cast down alive into the great hole, called Holmore, which may be seen to this day, and the castle is still standing by the margin. But no trace of Neil Moore or his steed was ever again beheld. They perished utterly by the vengeance of God. But some time after his disappearance, a rude stone figure seated on a horse was cast up out of the earth, and then all men knew the fate of the terrible chief who had braved the wrath of God. For here was his image and sign of his destruction. The stone figure is still preserved at the castle, and tradition says that if it were removed, the whole castle will crumble to pieces in a single night and be cast into Polmore. Our next story for today is called St. Senan's Well, also attributed to Lady Wilde. There is a place on the shore of Scattery Island where, according to the most ancient tradition, a sacred well once existed, with miraculous curative powers. But no one could ever discover the place, for at high water the sea covered up every point up to the edge of the island, and the shifting sand made all efforts to find the locality of the well vain and fruitless. But one day a young man who was lame in both legs from the effects of a fall, and much disabled in consequence, was going along the shore of some companions, when he suddenly sank up to his waist in the sand. With much difficulty, and after a long while, his comrades managed to haul him up, when to their amazement they found that his legs were now quite straight, and he stood up before them 4 inches taller than before he had sunk down into the sand. So at once they knew that the sacred well must have worked the cure, and they dug and cleared away the sand, till at last they came on some ancient steps. And down below lay the well, clear and fresh, and untouched by the salt of the sea, the holy well of Saint Sinan that their fathers and forefathers had vainly looked for. Now there was great rejoicing in the country when the news spread, and all the people from far and near who had pains and ailments rushed off to the well and drank of the waters and poured libations of it over their persons, wherever the pain or disease may lie. And in a short time wonderful cures were effected. So next day still greater crowds arrived to try their good luck. But when they came to the place, not a vestige of the well could be found. The sand and the sea had covered it all, and from that day to this, the holy well of Saint Sinan has never been seen by mortal eyes. It would be wonderful to find such a thing, no? Our next story for today is Kilnagrena. Tober Kilnagrena, or the Well of the Fountain of the Sun, was discovered only about 80 years ago by a strange chance in the country Cork. This story is also attributed to Lady Wilde. The land was a desolate marsh. No one built on it, and nothing grew on it or near it. But a large gray stone lay there, with a natural hollow in the center that would hold about a gallon of water, and were close to the remains of an old pagan fort. One day, the farmer who owned the land carried off this great gray stone to use as a drinking trough for his cattle. But not long after, all the cattle grew sick. Then all the children sickened, and so the farmer said that there was ill luck in the business. And he carried back the stone to its old place, on which all the household regained their health. Thereupon the farmer began to think there must be something wonderful and mysterious in the locality. So he had the marsh thoroughly drained, and after which process they came upon an ancient stone circle, and in the midst was a well of beautiful fresh water. Some people said there were writing on the stones and strange carvings, but it was generally believed to be a druid temple and oracle, for there was a tradition that a woman called the Bananoma, or the nymph of the well, had once lived there, and that she had the gift of prophecy, and uttered oracles to those who sought her at the shrine by the well. And there was a little wooden image of her that used to speak to the people. So it was said and believed. It is certain, however, that a pagan temple once existed there, for which reason Saint Patrick cursed the land and turned it into a marsh. And the well was hidden for 1,000 years, according to Saint Patrick's word. On the discovery of the well, the whole country flocked to it for its cures. Tents were erected and the pattern was organized, which went on for some years with great success. And many authentic instances were recorded of marvelous miracles performed there. The ritual observed was very strict at the beginning. 3 draughts of water were taken by the pilgrims. The number of drinks, 3. The number of rounds on their knees were 3, thus making the circuit of the well 9 times. After each round, the pilgrim laid a stone on the ancient altar in the Druid circle, called the Well of the Sun. And those stones, named in Irish the Stones of the Sun, were generally pure white, about the size of a pigeon's egg. They had a beautiful appearance after rain, when the sun shines on them, and were doubtless held sacred to the sun in pagan times. The angels will reckon these stones at the last day, but each particular saint will take charge of his own votaries, and see that the stones are properly counted, for each man will receive forgiveness according to their number. But gradually the revelry at the pattern gave occasion for so much scandal that the priest denounced the well from the altar, along with all the wickedness it fostered and encouraged. Still, the people would not give up the pattern, and the drinking, and the dancing, and gambling, and fighting went on worse than ever, until one day a man was killed. After this, a curse seemed to fall on the place. The well lost all its miraculous powers. No cures were effected. The maimed, the halt, and the blind prayed before it, and went through the rounds, and piled the stones as usual, but no help came. And worst sign of all, a great pagan stone, on which a cross had been erected, fell down from its own accord, and the cross lay shattered on the ground. Then all the people knew that the curse of blood and of Saint Patrick were indeed over the well. So it was deserted, and the tents were struck, and no pattern was ever held there any more. For the virtue of healing had gone from the fountain of the sun, and never has come back to it through all the years. Even the Banhelma, the nymph of the fountain, who used to manifest herself occasionally to the regenerate under the form of a trout, disappeared at the same time, and though she may be heard at other sacred wells, was never again seen by the devout pilgrims who watched for her appearance at Tober Kilnagrina. Seems to be a pattern. Just don't murder near the well, my dears. Our next story for today is called The Irish Fakir, attributed to Lady Wilde. Many of the professional prayermen, or fakirs, resort to the Tober Breda during the pattern and manage to obtain gifts and contributions and all sorts of excellent things in exchange for their prayers from the rich farmers and young girls, to whom they promise good luck and perhaps a lover who will be handsome and young. These Irish fakirs, or sacred fraternity of beggars, lead a pleasant, thoroughly idle life. They carry a wallet and a staff, and being looked on as holy men, endowed with strange spiritual gifts, they are entirely supported by the voluntary gifts of the people, who firmly believe in the mysterious efficacy of their prayers and blessings and prognostics of luck. One of these fakirs, towards the end of his life, was glad to find shelter in the poorhouse. He was then 80 years of age, but a tall, erect old man, with flowing white beard and hair, keen eyes, and of the most venerable aspect. A gentleman who saw him there, being much struck with his dignified and remarkable appearance, induced him to tell the story of his life, which was marked by several strange and curious incidents. He said he was a farmer's son, but from his earliest youth hated work, and only liked to spend the long summer day lying in the grass, gazing up into the clouds, dreaming, and thinking where all they were sailing to, and longing to float away with them to other lands. Meanwhile, his father raged and swore and beat him, often cruelly, because he would not work. But all the same, he could not bring himself to be digging from morning to night, and keep herding cattle, and keeping company with only laborers. So when he was about 20, he formed a plan to run away. For he thought, if the stupid old fakirs who are lame and blind and deaf find people ready to support them, all for nothing, might not he have a better chance for getting board and lodging without work? Since he had youth and health, and could tell them stories to no end of the great old ancient times. So one night he quitted his father's house secretly, and went forth on his travels into the wide world, only to be met with bitter disappointment and rude repulse, for the farmers would have nothing to say to him, nor the farmers' wives. Everyone eyed him with suspicion. Why, they said, should a great stalwart young man over 6 feet high go about the country begging? He was a tramp and meant no good, and they chased him away from their grounds. Then he thought he would disguise himself as a regular fakir, so he got a long cloak and took a wallet and a staff, and hid his raven black hair under a close skull cap, and tried to look as old as he could. But the regular fakirs soon found him out, and their spite and rage was great, for all of them were either lame of a leg or blind of an eye, And they said, "Why should this great, broad-shouldered young fellow with the black eyes come and take away our chances of living, when he ought to be able to work and earn enough to keep himself without robbing us of our just rights?" And they grumbled and snarled at him like so many dogs, and set people to spy on him and watch him. Still, he was determined to try his luck on every side. So he went to all the stations round about, and prayed louder and faster than any pilgrim or fakir amongst the whole lot. But wherever he went, he saw a horrible old hag, forever following him. Her head was wrapped up in an old red shawl, and nothing was seen of her face except 2 eyes, which glared on him like coals of a fire, whichever way he turned. And now, in truth, his life became miserable to him because of this loathsome hag. So he went from station to station to escape her, but still she followed him, and the sound of her stick on the ground was ever after him, like the hammering of a nail in his coffin. For sure he felt he would die of torment and horror. At last he thought he would try Tobar Breda for his next station, as it was several miles off, and she might not be able to follow him so far. This rejoiced his heart. So he went, and not a sign of her was seen upon the road. This rejoiced his heart, and he kneeled down at the well, and was saying his prayers louder and faster than ever, when he looked up, and there, kneeling right opposite to him, at the other side of the road, was the detestable old witch. But she took no notice of him, only went on saying her prayers and telling her beads as if no one were by. Presently, however, she stooped down to wash her face in the well, and, as she threw up the water with her hands, she let the red shawl slip down over her shoulders, and then the young man beheld to his astonishment a beautiful young girl before him, with a complexion like a lily and a rose, and soft brown hair falling in showers of curls over her snow-white neck. He had only a glimpse for a moment while she cast the water in her face, and then she drew the shawl again over her head and shoulders, and was the old hag once more that had filled him with horror. But that one glimpse was enough to make his heart faint with love, for now, for the first time, she turned her burning eyes full on him, and kept them fixed until he seemed to swoon away in the ecstasy of happiness, and knew nothing more till he found her seated beside him, holding his hand in hers, and still looking intently on his face with her glittering eyes. Interesting little story. But I'm afraid, my dears, this will conclude our reading hour for today. I do thank you all so much for joining me today. But until we next meet, my dears, Ta-ta, and fare thee well. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you like what you saw here, I ask that you leave a like, comment, subscribe, and until we next meet, my dears, I do hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And until then, ta-ta and farewell.